In the summer of 2006, a single photograph from Beirut unsettled the world. Young Lebanese in a red convertible, dressed for a night out, cruising through wreckage left by airstrikes, smoke still curling overhead. It won World Press Photo of the Year, and it surfaced a question no one has been able to close. 20 years later, that same collision, ordinary leisure against active war, now defines a growing wave of travelers who see the danger and go anyway. What drives them, and what their arrival actually means for the people already living inside it, is far messier than any side wants to admit. To understand this environment, we must look past the single profile of the thrill seeker. The individuals crossing into active conflict zones form a network of overlapping categories, often sharing the exact same hotels, roads, and restaurants. At one end are the edge tourists and social media creators, individuals traveling specifically for novelty, adventure, or digital visibility. They share these spaces with diaspora returnees, expatriates returning to visit relatives, secure family property, or fulfill cultural obligations. Then come the voluntourists, who enter these regions for short-term, sometimes paid projects with local organizations. Alongside them are professionals, foreign journalists, photographers, and the local fixers who guide them, moving constantly between active reporting and ordinary leisure spaces. There are career aid workers, deployed for months at a time, whose presence directly supports the local economy. In turn, the local business owners, taxi drivers, and hotel staff who depend on these arrivals form an indirect travel category, their livelihoods tied directly to the influx of outsiders. Data collected from regional arrivals reveals a distinct demographic. 68% are young adults between the ages of 20 and 45, with a slight male skew of 55%. This population is highly educated. Over 70% of returning diaspora professionals hold graduate degrees, while 61% of content creators hold credentials in communications. They carry a mix of regional and international passports, often traveling under the official protection of aid organizations or media credentials, while simultaneously occupying spaces of leisure. Mapping these distinct groups replaces the concept of the solitary visitor with a concrete ecosystem where the lines between duty, identity, and tourism are constantly blurred. The internal justification for crossing into a zone of active violence often begins with a sense of necessity. For some, the choice is driven by direct obligation, the immediate need to check on a damaged home, secure property, or assist remaining relatives. When Bisan Maroon was photographed in southern Beirut in August 2006, she was not seeking a spectacle. She was returning to inspect her family's apartment on the first day of a ceasefire. Similarly, a Palestinian-American physician from Boston returned to Gaza to run a pediatric clinic, framing the decision as a personal responsibility that superseded official warnings. In these accounts, travel is not leisure, but a duty. For those traveling voluntarily, the motivations are different. Here, the pursuit of authenticity often drives individuals to seek out spaces untouched by conventional tourism. In this framework, navigating risk becomes a test of seriousness, a way to separate the casual observer from the committed witness. Some travelers argue that by documenting what international media overlooks, they make the invisible visible, turning their physical presence into an act of solidarity. But this moral justification exists alongside more complex incentives. For independent creators, the frontline offers an unmatched professional arena. The financial rewards of platform monetization and the rapid audience growth, tied to high-risk visibility, create a powerful incentive structure. A creator streaming POV video from rebel-held Idlib can raise hundreds of thousands of dollars for local aid, while simultaneously building a digital brand. The tension lies in how the exact same journey is narrated. One traveler views their presence as a vital act of global empathy. To an outsider, that same presence can appear as voyeurism, an exercise of privilege, where risk is treated as a temporary commodity, backed by the safety net of an international passport. This clash of perspectives shows a sharp ethical divide, where the exact same trip can be read either as a vital act of support or as a profound exercise in exploitation. The case for visiting these regions rests on the tangible preservation of livelihoods and community survival. In a conflict zone, Conventional economic systems often collapse. Foreign investment vanishes, national currencies plummet, and traditional employment disappears. Under these conditions, the money spent by an incoming visitor goes directly to local operators, the taxi drivers, the family-run guest houses, the street vendors, and the translators who rely on cash to buy food and fuel. Beyond the financial impact, supporters argue that traveler presence maintains a critical line of cultural continuity. It tells a besieged population that they remain connected to the wider world, preventing the psychological toll of complete international isolation. In this view, traveling to a war zone is a practical, direct way to stand in solidarity with those who cannot leave. Yet, this perspective is countered by a far more troubling reality. To critics, the presence of leisure travelers in an area of active suffering reduces human tragedy to a mere spectacle. Taking photographs amidst ruin, writing about survival as an adventure, or treating a war-torn city as a backdrop for personal growth can strip local residents of their dignity. It commodifies their trauma, turning active grief into a consumable experience for audiences who enjoy the safety of distance. The ethical core of this debate often hinges on whose risk is being carried. A traveler holding an international passport possesses an ultimate safety net: the ability to evacuate when conditions deteriorate. The local population remains behind, bearing the long-term consequences of the violence. If a traveler is injured or captured, they draw heavily on scarce local resources, diverting emergency services, medical staff, and security personnel away from residents who need them most. Ultimately, the moral weight of these visits is rarely viewed the same way from the inside as it is from the outside. An observer watching from a comfortable home thousands of miles away might condemn a traveler's post as insensitive and exploitative. But the local merchant who sold that traveler a meal, or the driver who transported them, may view the encounter in purely practical terms, as a necessary means to feed their family for another week. Without a single universal moral framework to govern these choices, the ethical validity of conflict travel remains permanently unresolved, determined entirely by individual intent, immediate context, and how the visit is received by the community itself. A hotel ledger in a conflict zone tells a story of survival in numbers. When conventional industries collapse during active fighting, the physical currency brought in by travelers becomes a direct lifeline. In these fragile economies, even a small number of visitors can have an outsized impact on the surrounding community. In 2023, tourism receipts across the Middle East reached $459.9 billion. While the vast majority of this flowed through major stable hubs, a portion of that capital moved directly into volatile areas, where traditional credit and banking systems had ceased to function. In these markets, transactions are cash-based and immediate. A traveler paying cash for a room, hiring a driver, or buying meals at a family-run cafe injects hard currency directly into the immediate ecosystem, supporting local guides and market vendors who have no other source of income. Industry analysis indicates that this visitor spending is highly concentrated, with the bulk of the money going directly toward accommodation, food and beverage, and local transportation. To a guest house owner in southern Lebanon or a taxi driver in Baghdad, these arrivals are not viewed as a moral spectacle or a political statement. Instead, local business owners read these arrivals as livelihood preservation. A single booked room or a multi-day driving commission can cover rent, secure generator fuel, and purchase food for an entire family for weeks. For these operators, the immediate necessity of feeding a household takes precedence over the theoretical concerns of outside observers. Yet this immediate income exists alongside a long-term reputational risk. While cash flow provides immediate relief, relying on travel revenue in an active conflict zone exposes local businesses to future volatility when the situation deteriorates. But for the merchant holding the day's cash register, the immediate calculation is simple. The money from a visitor means the doors stay open. The immediate cash brought by a traveler can quickly be overshadowed by the political utility of their presence. When an outsider posts photos of a quiet cafe or a peaceful beach in a nation at war, those images do not exist in a vacuum. Combatants and state propagandists routinely monitor social media, seizing on these depictions of leisure as proof of stability. To a governing authority or an armed group, a tourist's video is a valuable asset, a ready-made campaign showing the world that their territory is secure and their administration is legitimate. But this projection of normalcy rarely reflects the daily reality of the host population. An image that reassures a potential traveler can deeply unsettle locals who know the calm is artificial. Furthermore, the physical safety of these visitors imposes a heavy, silent burden on the community. When a leisure traveler enters an unstable area, they rarely carry their own security infrastructure. If combat begins, the responsibility to protect, evacuate, or rescue them falls squarely on local residents, civilian guides, and overstretched first responders. This shifts the physical danger of the trip from the privileged passport holder to those who have no choice but to stay. When suffering is reduced to a backdrop for digital content, the consent of the affected community is almost entirely absent. Local residents, grieving loss or struggling to survive, find their private tragedies transformed into a public commodity. Filmed without permission for an audience, thousands of miles away. Outside of pure leisure, thousands cross these borders under the banner of professional or humanitarian duty. Freelance journalists, independent documentarians, and aid workers carry official mandates, yet their daily presence often mirrors the patterns of the tourists they bypass. They book the same hotel rooms, dine in the same cafes, and travel the same roads, blurring the boundary between working witness and casual visitor. Institutions attempt to define this boundary through rigid administrative frameworks. Accreditation systems, press credentials, and specialized insurance policies serve as formal permissions, separating essential personnel from thrill seekers. Yet, risk management guidelines increasingly adopt the language of non-essential travel when evaluating independent operators. Freelance reporters often fly without corporate backing, working in conflict zones on standard commercial tickets, while relying on personal safety protocols that offer little protection if conditions deteriorate. This institutional safety net rarely extends to the local guides and fixers who make these journeys possible. While international visitors carry foreign passports that guarantee an evacuation route, local fixers absorb the primary practical and reputational risk. They secure transport, translate interviews, and manage local checkpoints, often bearing the long-term consequences of an operation long after the foreign reporter or aid worker has returned home. When public perception fails to distinguish between the dedicated witness and the war tourist, it is often these local partners who pay the price, exposing a division that institutional credentials cannot fully obscure. In the first quarter of 2026, international tourist arrivals to the Middle East dropped by 14% compared to the previous year, according to data from the United Nations World Tourism Organization. This decline directly reflects the security shocks of early 2026, but the broad statistic obscures a highly fragmented reality. On the ground, conditions vary dramatically by country, city, and even neighborhood, presenting an environment of stark contrast that defies any single regional narrative. To map this environment accurately, reporting must bypass broad assumptions and rely on corroborated field testimonies from local residents, business owners, and journalists. In Tyre, a southern Lebanese coastal city, local municipal coordinators and merchants confirmed by July 2026 that beach cleanups had begun, and roughly 90% of displaced residents had returned. This tentative revival of public life occurred alongside major diplomatic shifts, including a military security agreement and the lifting of a 4-decade U.S. flight ban to Lebanon. Yet, less than 50 miles away in Beirut's southern suburb of Dahiyeh, the situation is entirely different. Local shopkeepers and residents report near total commercial disruption following severe spring airstrikes. In border villages like Yarun, displaced families cannot even return to inspect their shops, relying instead on commercial satellite imagery to see if their livelihoods still exist. This the localized volatility is reflected in contemporary travel advisories. While international transit hubs in the Gulf maintain high aviation capacity, Western foreign ministries upgraded warnings in mid-2026, advising against all non-essential travel to Lebanon, Iraq, and border zones. For researchers and journalists, documenting this environment requires strict verification. Every present tense claim must be backed by dated independent sources on the ground. Social media posts showing bustling cafes or quiet streets must be carefully verified for precise date, location, and permission, as an image of safety in one district can mask active hostilities just a few miles away. In 2026, the question of whether a conflict zone is open for travel depends entirely on which street you are standing on. As geopolitical divides deepen, the line between witness and spectator grows thinner than ever. Choosing to enter a conflict zone remains a profound privilege, defined entirely by the freedom to leave. Ultimately, the question is no longer just why we look, but what our presence costs those who cannot escape. What do you think? Share your thoughts below.